The conference room door slammed open with such force that the framed certificates on the wall rattled. Rebecca Torres stumbled inside, her worn leather portfolio clutched against her chest, breathing hard like she'd just sprinted up 12 flights of stairs. Her hair had escaped its careful bun, dark strands sticking to her flushed cheeks. The zipper on her blazer, a navy blue thrift store find she'd spent an hour steaming the night before, had broken sometime between the lobby and the elevator. 6 pairs of eyes turned toward her with expressions ranging from amusement to outright disdain. "I'm so sorry," Rebecca gasped, pressing her free hand against the doorframe. The elevator got stuck between floors. "I had to take the stairs." Richard Blackwell, seated at the head of the gleaming mahogany table, didn't bother hiding his smirk. He was the kind of man who'd never run anywhere in his life, never had to. His silver cufflinks probably cost more than Rebecca's monthly rent. "Well," he drawled, checking his Patek Philippe watch with deliberate slowness, "at least you got your cardio in. We almost started without you." Scattered laughter rippled through the room. Rebecca felt heat crawl up her neck, but she forced herself to walk to the empty chair at the opposite end of the table, her old laptop bag bumping against her hip with each step. The chair leg scraped loudly against the marble floor when she pulled it out. Everything about her presence felt too loud, too clumsy, too wrong for this pristine space with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Manhattan. "Shall we begin?" The question came from Diane Crawford, her platinum bob perfectly styled, her crimson lips curved in something that wasn't quite a smile. She sat to Richard's right, her manicured nails tapping an impatient rhythm on her tablet. "We have 3 more pitches today, and frankly, I'm already skeptical about this one." Rebecca's hands trembled slightly as she opened her laptop, the ancient machine whirring to life with an embarrassingly loud fan noise. She could feel them watching her, judging every detail. Her scuffed shoes, the frayed hem of her slacks, the absence of a designer handbag or luxury accessories. "Ms. Torres," Richard began, leaning back in his chair with the casual confidence of someone who'd never been told no in his life, "before we waste everyone's time, let's establish some basics. What's your background? Where did you go to school?" Rebecca swallowed hard. This wasn't how pitches were supposed to start. She'd rehearsed her opening line 100 times, the hook that would grab their attention, the vision that would make them see what she saw. But Richard wasn't interested in her vision. Not yet. Maybe not ever. "I didn't attend a traditional university," Rebecca said quietly. "I took online courses. MIT OpenCourseWare, Stanford's free engineering programs. I taught myself." The man sitting across from her, Thomas Bennett, let out a soft whistle. "Self-taught. That's adorable." He exchanged glances with the woman beside him, Patricia Morgan, who was already typing something on her phone, probably a dismissive text about the hopeless case sitting before them. "Listen," Diane cut in, her voice sharp enough to slice through Rebecca's carefully constructed composure. "We appreciate your initiative, really. But this room represents over $3 billion in managed capital. We invest in proven leadership, in teams with track records. What we don't do is gamble on science experiments from people who learned engineering from YouTube videos." "That's not," Rebecca started, but Richard held up one hand. "Let her pitch, Diane. At least give her the courtesy of humiliation." His smile was all teeth, no warmth. "Go ahead, Ms. Torres. Wow us." Rebecca's fingers found the space bar on her laptop. The first slide projected onto the screen behind her, slightly pixelated because her ancient computer couldn't quite handle the resolution. The title read, "Quantum Flow, Revolutionary Fluid Dynamics for Next-Generation Energy Systems." She stood, her legs unsteady, but her voice growing stronger as she spoke. "Current energy grid systems lose approximately 32% of power during transmission and conversion. My technology reduces that loss to less than 8% through a proprietary application of quantum tunneling principles in fluid-based conductors." Patricia looked up from her phone, one perfectly shaped eyebrow raised. "Quantum tunneling. In fluids. You're aware that quantum effects are only observable at the subatomic scale, right?" "In most applications, yes," Rebecca replied, clicking to her next slide, which showed a complex schematic of molecular structures. But by engineering specific lattice configurations in liquid metal alloys, we can create macro-scale tunneling effects that— This is pseudoscience, Thomas interrupted flatly. He hadn't even looked at her slides. Liquid metal alloys? What are we, making Terminator robots? This is the exact kind of half-baked thinking that happens when people educate themselves from Wikipedia instead of actual laboratories. Rebecca felt something crack inside her chest, a small fissure in the armor she'd built over years of being overlooked, dismissed, and underestimated. But she pressed on. I have working prototypes. The data shows. Data from where? Diane demanded. What lab? What university partnership? Who validated your results? I validated them, Rebecca said quietly. In my apartment. I built the testing equipment myself. The room erupted in barely suppressed laughter. Richard didn't even try to hide it, his shoulders shaking as he exchanged looks with the others. In your apartment, he repeated. So you're telling me that you, working alone in presumably some studio in Queens, solved a problem that teams at MIT, Stanford, and about a dozen Fortune 500 companies have spent hundreds of millions trying to crack? Yes, Rebecca said simply. That single word hung in the air like a challenge. Diane's tapping stopped. Patricia's smirk faded slightly. But then Richard leaned forward, his expression shifting from amused to irritated. This is insulting, he said coldly. You came here with homemade science projects and delusions of grandeur. Do you have any idea how much real innovation costs? How many PhDs? How much lab equipment? How many years of peer review? You can't just MacGyver your way into a billion-dollar industry. Rebecca's hands clenched at her sides. I'm not trying to MacGyver anything. I have a solution that works. If you would just look at the data. The data from your apartment, Thomas cut in mockingly. Right. And I'm sure your kitchen table experiments are totally reproducible and scalable. He made air quotes with his fingers. Revolutionary. Your valuation is particularly amusing, Diane added, swiping through Rebecca's pitch deck on her tablet. You're asking for $8 million for 20% equity? That puts your company at a $40 million valuation. Based on what? Your online courses and kitchen experiments. Rebecca felt her face burning. The number wasn't arbitrary. She'd spent weeks calculating it, factoring in development costs, manufacturing projections, market analysis. But explaining that now felt pointless. They'd already decided she was a joke. Look, Richard said, his tone shifting to something that might have been mistaken for kindness, if not for the condescension dripping from every word. I'm going to save you some time and embarrassment. This isn't going to work. Not here, not anywhere in this city. My advice? Go get a real job. Maybe take some actual classes. And definitely stop wasting people's time with this nonsense. The other investors nodded in agreement, already closing their portfolios, reaching for their phones. The meeting was over. Rebecca had been in the room for less than 15 minutes, and it was over. But she didn't move. She stood there, her laptop still projecting that schematic onto the screen, her heart hammering against her ribs. Years of work. Countless sleepless nights. Every dollar she'd saved from her 2 jobs. All of it dismissed in minutes because she didn't fit their narrow definition of credible. Are you still here? Patricia asked, her voice sharp with impatience. We're done. Rebecca closed her laptop slowly, her hands no longer shaking. Something had shifted inside her, something cold and calculating settling where that crack had been. Can I ask one question before I go? Richard sighed heavily. Make it quick. I noticed in the news last month that Blackwell Capital is spearheading a consortium to build the Meridian Grid project, Rebecca said carefully. The distributed energy network that's supposed to revolutionize how power moves between urban centers. Richard's expression changed slightly, a flicker of interest breaking through his irritation. What about it? The project timeline got pushed back, Rebecca continued. 6 months, I believe. The press release cited technical challenges in fluid conductor optimization. She paused, letting the words sink in. I was curious what specific challenges you're facing. Diane's eyes narrowed. That's proprietary information. And frankly, none of your business. Of course, Rebecca said smoothly. I just wondered if it might be related to the phase transition problem. When you're trying to maintain quantum coherence in liquid conductors across varying temperatures and pressures, the standard approach would be to use germanium-based stabilizers, but those tend to crystallize at the junction points, creating resistance spikes that negate any efficiency gains. The room had gone very quiet. Thomas was no longer looking at his phone. Patricia had straightened in her chair. Richard was staring at Rebecca with an expression she couldn't quite read. "How did you?" Richard started, then stopped himself. "What do you know about our technical challenges?" "Only what I've read in the engineering journals," Rebecca replied. "And what I solved in my apartment." She let that hang there for a moment. "You're using the Sada Richards approach, aren't you?" "It's elegant theoretically, but it fails at scale because the stabilizer matrix can't adapt to dynamic load changes." "That's classified information," Diane said sharply, but there was something else in her voice now. Uncertainty. Maybe even a hint of fear. Rebecca smiled for the first time since entering the room, and it wasn't a nice smile. "Is it? Because I published a paper on that exact problem 3 years ago. Not in a major journal, obviously. I couldn't afford the submission fees. But it's out there, in an open access repository. 17 people have downloaded it. I assume at least one of them was on your technical team." Richard had pulled out his phone, his fingers moving rapidly across the screen. His face had gone pale. "What's the title of this paper?" "Adaptive Quantum Stabilization in Macroscale Fluid Systems Using Layered Molecular Architecture," Rebecca recited from memory. "I submitted it under my full name, Rebecca and Torres, with my apartment address as the institutional affiliation because I didn't have anything else." If you're enjoying this story, please hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below. This is just the beginning, and trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. The silence in the room was deafening. Patricia was typing furiously on her tablet now, presumably searching for the paper. Thomas had pushed his chair back from the table slightly, like he needed physical distance from what was unfolding. Diane's perfectly composed expression had cracked, revealing something raw underneath. Panic, maybe. Or calculation. But it was Richard who spoke first, his voice carefully controlled. "That paper discusses theoretical frameworks. It doesn't mention patents." "No," Rebecca agreed. "It doesn't." "So you have no intellectual property protection," Diane said quickly, grasping at straws. "Which means even if your theories are sound, which I'm not conceding, anyone could implement them." Rebecca tilted her head slightly, studying them. 6 brilliant faces, 6 ruthless minds, all scrambling to figure out how this had gone so wrong. How the person they dismissed as a nobody, a joke, a waste of time, had just revealed she might be holding the solution to their billion-dollar problem. "Do you know what patent number 11,742,938 covers?" Rebecca asked softly. The effect was instantaneous. Richard's phone slipped from his hand, clattering loudly on the table. Diane's face went white. Thomas actually stood up, his chair rolling backward and hitting the credenza behind him with a loud thud. "That's not possible," Richard said, but his voice had lost all its earlier confidence. "That patent belongs to—" He stopped, his eyes widening. "The holding company. Evergreen Technical Holdings." "A shell company," Patricia added, her voice barely above a whisper. "We've been trying to contact them for months. The lawyers said they're untraceable." "Not untraceable," Rebecca corrected gently. "Just very private. I set it up through a legal clinic that helps low-income inventors protect their work. Cost me $300 and a lot of paperwork. The patent itself cost another $1,000 to file. I saved for 8 months to afford it." She paused. "Evergreen is named after the street I grew up on. Evergreen Avenue in Sacramento." It seemed fitting. Richard had retrieved his phone and was now scrolling through what Rebecca assumed was the patent database. His face had gone from pale to gray. "This patent covers the entire process. The molecular architecture, the stabilization protocols, the adaptive algorithms. Everything." He looked up at Rebecca, and for the first time, she saw something in his eyes that wasn't contempt or amusement. It was fear. "You own the foundation of the Meridian Project." "I own the only proven solution to the phase transition problem," Rebecca clarified. "Your project will fail without it." "Actually, it's already failing, isn't it?" That 6-month delay is going to turn into a year, maybe more. And every month that passes, your investors get more nervous, your competitors get closer, and your window of opportunity closes a little more. Diane had recovered some of her composure, though her hands were shaking slightly as she folded them on the table. "What do you want?" she asked bluntly. "Name your price." Rebecca shook her head slowly. "You think this is about money?" "Everything is about money," Thomas said, trying to regain some of his earlier bravado. "Everyone has a price. So what's yours? 10 million? 20? We can write that check right now." "No," Rebecca said simply. "You can't." "Try us," Richard challenged, but there was desperation creeping into his voice. 40 million. Your original valuation. We'll buy the patent outright right now." Rebecca closed her eyes for a moment, remembering the first time she'd tried to pitch this technology, 3 years ago, to a different group of investors. How they'd laughed her out of the room without even letting her finish her introduction. Remembering the rejection emails, dozens of them, all saying the same thing in different words: not qualified, not credible, not worth their time. Remembering her landlord threatening eviction because she'd spent her rent money on patent fees. Remembering her mother's voice on the phone, worried and frustrated, asking why Rebecca couldn't just get a normal job, settle down, stop chasing impossible dreams. Remembering every single person who'd looked at her and decided she wasn't enough. She opened her eyes. "I came here today because my lawyer insisted I make one last good faith attempt to license the technology. To give you a chance to be part of something revolutionary without destroying yourselves trying to work around my patent." She picked up her laptop bag, slinging it over her shoulder. "But you couldn't even give me 15 minutes of basic respect." "Rebecca, wait," Diane said, standing abruptly. The use of her first name was jarring after all the MS, Torres's, and barely concealed mockery. "We made a mistake. We misjudged you. But we can fix this. Whatever you want, whatever terms you need, we'll make it work." "You know what's interesting?" Rebecca said, not answering directly. "Patent 11,742,938 isn't my only patent. It's just the one you need right now. I have 3 others. Different applications, different industries, all filed under different holding companies. All protected. All mine." She smiled that cold smile again. "I learned a long time ago that people like you only see value in credentials and pedigree. So I made sure my value was legally ironclad before I ever walked into rooms like this." Richard had come around the table, his earlier arrogance completely gone. "Name your terms. Please." "The Meridian Project represents 18 months of work, 300 million in investments. We have contracts, obligations, investors who will destroy us if this fails." "That sounds difficult," Rebecca said sympathetically. "Have you considered solving the problem yourself? Maybe YouTube has some good tutorials." The shot landed exactly as intended. Richard flinched like she'd physically struck him. Patricia looked away, her face flushed with shame. Even Diane, calculating Diane, couldn't meet Rebecca's eyes. "I have a proposal," Rebecca said after letting them suffer for a long moment. "Not a negotiation. Not a discussion. A take-it-or-leave-it offer that expires when I walk out this door." "Anything," Thomas said desperately. "Name it." "I will license the patent to your consortium," Rebecca began, speaking slowly and clearly. "Not to Blackwell Capital specifically, but to the Meridian Project as an entity. The license fee is $200 million upfront, plus 7% royalty on all revenue generated by the system for the next 20 years. Richard's face went pale again. That's more than our entire projected profit margin." "I'm not finished," Rebecca continued calmly. "Additionally, I require a seat on the board of directors for the Meridian Project with full voting rights. I require final approval on all technical decisions related to the implementation of my technology. And I require a formal, written apology from every person in this room to be published on your website and social media channels, acknowledging that you dismissed innovative technology based on bias rather than merit." The silence that followed was absolute. Rebecca could hear the HVAC system humming, the distant sound of traffic from 12 stories below, her own heart beating steadily in her chest. The apology isn't negotiable, she added. Neither is the board seat. The financial terms I'm willing to discuss slightly, but only if I walk out of here with a signed letter of intent within the next hour. Diane looked at Richard. Richard looked at Thomas. Patricia was openly crying now, mascara running down her cheeks, though whether from anger or humiliation or simple shock, Rebecca couldn't tell. You'd destroy a $300 million project over an apology? Diane asked incredulously. Over pride? This isn't about pride, Rebecca said quietly. This is about making sure the next person who walks into this room with a brilliant idea and no pedigree gets a fair shot. The next self-taught engineer. The next immigrant kid. The next person who doesn't fit your narrow definition of credible. She adjusted her laptop bag on her shoulder. So no, I wouldn't destroy your project over an apology. But I will absolutely let it fail if you're not willing to acknowledge publicly that your bias almost cost you everything. Richard was making rapid calculations. She could see it in his eyes. The math was brutal. Pay Rebecca's demands or lose the entire project. Face humiliation or face financial ruin. There wasn't really a choice, and they all knew it. 1 hour, he asked, his voice hoarse. 58 minutes now, Rebecca said, checking her watch, a cheap digital thing she'd bought at a pharmacy. We need to make some calls, Diane said, already pulling out her phone. Legal, our investors, the other consortium members. 57 minutes, Rebecca interrupted. Every call you make is a minute you lose. Thomas had sat back down, his head in his hands. How did we not see this coming, he muttered. How did we not check? You didn't check because you decided I wasn't worth checking on, Rebecca said simply. You saw what you expected to see. A nobody. A joke. Someone so far beneath you that due diligence seemed unnecessary. Patricia wiped at her face, smearing her makeup further. I'm sorry, she said suddenly, her voice breaking. I'm so sorry. You're right. We were awful. I was awful. Rebecca looked at her for a long moment. Of everyone in the room, Patricia looked the most genuinely devastated, the most actually remorseful. But one apology wasn't enough. Not nearly enough. 55 minutes, Rebecca said. What happened next was a flurry of controlled chaos. Richard barked orders into his phone while Diane drafted the letter of intent on her tablet. Thomas was on a video call with what sounded like the consortium's legal team, his voice growing increasingly desperate as he tried to explain the situation. Patricia just sat there, staring at Rebecca like she was trying to understand how everything had gone so catastrophically wrong. Rebecca remained standing by the door, watching them scramble. This was power, she realized. Not the kind that came from money or connections or prestigious degrees. The power that came from being underestimated and preparing for it. The power that came from knowing your worth even when nobody else saw it. The power that came from patience, from waiting for exactly the right moment to reveal the cards you'd been holding all along. A paralegal rushed in with printed documents. Lawyers appeared on laptop screens, their faces grave as they speed-read through Rebecca's patent. Someone brought up Rebecca's research paper on the projector screen, and she watched them read it, really read it this time, seeing the genius they'd dismissed as pseudoscience minutes earlier. We need more time, Richard said desperately, checking his watch. This is too complex to finalize in an hour. 42 minutes, Rebecca corrected. And no. The offer expires on schedule. But the board approvals, the consortium agreements, the financial restructuring, Diane was listing items frantically. This will take weeks to properly execute. Then the letter of intent needs to be airtight, Rebecca said calmly. But that's your problem, not mine. 41 minutes. She watched them work, these titans of industry reduced to frantic clerks, and felt a complex mixture of emotions. Satisfaction, certainly. Vindication. But also something sadder. How many other brilliant minds had walked into rooms like this and been destroyed? How many innovations had been lost because someone didn't have the right pedigree, the right connections, the right appearance? How many Rebecca Torres had given up after their first humiliation? If you're still watching, thank you for staying with Rebecca's story. Make sure to like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear this message. Because this isn't just about one woman and one patent. It's about every time someone's been underestimated. At the 30-minute mark, Richard presented Rebecca with a draft letter of intent. She read it carefully, making notes with a pen she pulled from her bag. "This clause about technical oversight needs to be stronger," she said, circling a paragraph. "And the royalty calculation doesn't account for international licensing. That needs to be addressed." "We don't have time," Thomas started. 28 minutes, Rebecca interrupted, handing back the document. "Better work faster." They did. Miraculously, impossibly, they did. At the 57-minute mark, Rebecca held in her hands a legally binding letter of intent that guaranteed her everything she'd asked for, pending formal contract execution within 30 days. The financial terms, the board seat, the technical authority, and yes, the apology, to be published within 72 hours. "I need everyone to sign," Rebecca said, pulling out her phone to document the moment. "Right now." They did, one by one, their signatures scratching across the paper like admissions of defeat. Richard signed first, his hand steady despite everything. Diane next, her face a mask of professional composure that couldn't quite hide the storm underneath. Thomas signed without looking at Rebecca. Patricia signed last, and when she handed back the pen, she said again, "I'm sorry." "I really am." Rebecca folded the document carefully and placed it in her laptop bag. She looked at each of them in turn, these powerful people who'd learned a very expensive lesson about underestimating the wrong person. "The draft contracts will be on your desks in 3 days," she said. "I'll expect them executed within a week. If there are any attempts to renegotiate, minimize my role, or dilute the terms, I will walk away and license to your competitors instead. NextGen Energy has been very interested in my work." Richard's face went white. NextGen was their biggest rival, the consortium's nightmare scenario. 3 days, he confirmed hoarsely. Rebecca walked to the door, then paused with her hand on the handle. She turned back one last time. "You know what's funny? I actually came here hoping you'd say yes. Hoping you'd see the potential and want to partner with me. I believed in what we could build together." She shook her head slowly. "But you couldn't see past your own prejudices long enough to recognize brilliance standing right in front of you. That's not just a moral failing. That's a strategic one. And in your world, strategic failures are the ones that really cost you." She pulled open the door, then delivered her final words, the ones she'd been composing in her head since the moment Richard had first mocked her delayed arrival. "You didn't lose today because I outsmarted you. You lost because you stopped listening before you asked the right questions. You assumed you knew everything about me based on nothing but bias. And that's on you." Rebecca Torres walked out of that conference room with her head high, her broken zipper and scuffed shoes suddenly irrelevant. Behind her, she left 6 of Manhattan's most powerful investors in chaos, their billion-dollar project salvaged only by the grace of the woman they'd tried to humiliate. The elevator doors closed on their panicked faces, and Rebecca allowed herself a small, genuine smile. She had just turned the worst day of her life into the greatest victory she'd ever known. And the best part? This was only the beginning. 3 months later, Rebecca sat in her new office, corner suite, floor-to-ceiling windows, overlooking the same Manhattan skyline she'd seen from that conference room. The Meridian project was ahead of schedule now, implementing her designs with the kind of efficiency that came from actual innovation rather than expensive guesswork. Her bank account had numbers in it that still didn't feel real. But the thing that felt best, the thing that made her smile every morning when she walked past the reception area, was the framed article on the wall. "Blackwell Capital apologizes for investment bias." Underneath it, her mother had written in a card that sat on Rebecca's desk, "Told you those dreams weren't impossible, Mija. Just harder than most. Harder than most. But not impossible. Never impossible." Rebecca Torres had proved that in the most spectacular way possible, in that conference room where 6 investors learned that the woman they mocked was the only one who could save them. And every day since, she'd been proving it again, one patent at a time, one innovation at a time, one shattered assumption at a time. They had thought she needed their money. They had been wrong. They had needed her genius. And by the time they figured it out, she'd made sure they'd pay full price for their lesson in humility. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever been underestimated or overlooked, please subscribe to this channel. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. And remember, your worth isn't determined by who recognizes it. It's determined by what you build when no one's watching. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.